Fleeting glances, constant excuses, secrets on her phone. Thomas was sure everything was fine between him and his wife, until he discovered something that changed his life forever. What did he find on her phone? Who was the mysterious man she's been meeting? And what pushed Thomas to take a desperate step? You won't believe how this story ends. Stick around for the most shocking twist. You won't want to miss it. This opening intrigues, promises shocking details, and keeps the audience eager to find out more without revealing too much up front. My wife cheated on me with a rich man, but she had no idea what he would do next. Thomas was returning home after a long shift at the factory. He worked in a workshop where noise and dust were his constant companions. The only thing keeping him going was the thought of a warm dinner at home and a few hours of rest in front of the TV. But when he walked into the house, his expectations were not met. The kitchen was empty, and on the table were a few fast food wrappers. Irma was sitting in the living room with her phone in her hands, engrossed in some photos or videos. "Hi," Thomas said, putting his work helmet on the shelf. "Hi," she quickly replied without even looking up. "Did you cook anything today?" he asked, trying to hide his disappointment. "I didn't have time. I had a lot to do." "Like what?" "Well, shopping, meeting a friend, a little walk." "Why?" Thomas said nothing. Recently, Irma often claimed she was busy, but it wasn't reflected at home. She had also stopped doing housework, leaving him to clean and do laundry himself. He reheated some leftovers he found in the fridge and sat down next to her. "So, I take it you're busy all the time now?" he asked. "Well, not all the time, but sometimes I just want to do something for myself." "Is that so wrong?" "No, it's not. But who will take care of us if you're not looking after the house?" "Thomas," she sighed, "we're adults. I don't have to do everything." He stayed silent. Something was changing, and Thomas could feel it. One day, he came home early. Instead of finding Irma at home as usual, he found a note on the table, "Went to a friend's. Don't wait for dinner." Thomas sat on the couch, reflecting on her behavior. She used to be so different, always taking care of the house and him. Now, she seemed to live her own life where there was hardly any place for him. The next day, Thomas decided to confront her directly. "Irma, I've noticed you're spending a lot of time away from home. Is something new going on?" "No, I just want to get out a bit. You know, staying home all the time is awful. But you used to say you liked it." "I did, but things change." Thomas decided not to press the issue. But doubts had already crept in. One day during his lunch break, Thomas received a message from his neighbor Jim. "Saw your Irma near the mall today. She was with some guy in a fancy suit." "What do you mean?" Thomas replied, feeling a chill inside. "Nothing, just noticed her." "Maybe it's nothing. But she was with some guy, so I thought you should know." Thomas decided not to bring it up immediately. He tried to focus on work, but thoughts about who the man with his wife could be kept nagging at him. A few days later, he found a receipt from a store they never shopped at. The expenses were significant. "What's this for?" he asked that evening. "Oh, it's a gift for you." "For me? Then why didn't I get it?" Irma hesitated. "It's always hard to find something suitable for you, so I decided to set it aside." Thomas didn't believe her, but didn't press further. Another blow came one evening when he went to take out the trash. He saw a car in their neighborhood that looked familiar, the same fancy car Jim had mentioned. "Was someone looking for you?" he asked Irma when he returned home. "No, why?" "I just saw a car near the house. Maybe it was one of the neighbors." His suspicions grew. He started pondering how to uncover the truth without revealing his doubts. Thomas decided he needed to follow her. Thomas woke up in the morning, feeling a strange unease. His suspicions about Irma were only growing, and he decided to act. This time, instead of going to work, he decided to follow her. "Are you staying home today?" Irma asked when she saw him dressed in casual clothes, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "No, I decided to take the day off. I just want to rest." She looked at him with slight surprise but said nothing. A few hours later, Irma began getting ready. She put on a new dress Thomas had never seen before and applied makeup. "Got plans?" he asked, watching her put on earrings. "Yes, meeting the girls. We decided to do some shopping." "Shopping again?" "Well, I'm a woman, Thomas. she replied with a light smile. Thomas waited until she left the house, then quickly grabbed his jacket and followed her. He kept a distance so Irma wouldn't notice him as she headed to the shopping mall. Inside, she joined a few familiar women, and they walked around the shops together. At first glance, everything seemed normal, and Thomas began to think his suspicions were unfounded. But then he noticed a man approach Irma. He was a well-dressed stranger with an expensive watch on his wrist. They greeted each other, and he smiled warmly at her. Thomas stopped, trying to catch their exchange of words. Irma was laughing, gesturing animatedly, and the man was looking at her with an expression Thomas didn't like. It wasn't an ordinary look. There was something more to it. Thomas returned home, feeling a mix of emotions. Irma had indeed been with her friends, but who was that man? The next morning, Thomas decided to check Irma's things. He had never done this before, but now he couldn't shake his doubts. In the closet, among her dresses, he found a small box. Opening it, he saw an expensive bracelet with gold accents. "What is this?" Thomas asked that evening, holding the box in front of Irma. She looked at him in surprise, and then quickly grabbed the bracelet from his hands. "It's a gift," she said. "For who? You certainly didn't give it to me." "No, it's not for you. I bought it for my mom." "For your mom? And where did you get the money for something like this?" Irma laughed nervously. "I have a side job, Thomas." "A side job? What kind?" "Nothing special, just helping some acquaintances now and then." "What acquaintances? And why don't I know about this?" "I don't want to tell you yet. It doesn't matter." Thomas stared at her silently. She looked nervous, but at the same time, confident in her words. "Irma, we live comfortably. We have everything we need. Why do you suddenly need more money?" "Because I'm tired of constantly budgeting, Thomas. I want to have something beautiful, something new now and then. And your salary, sorry, doesn't allow us to have that." Thomas felt his anger rising but forced himself to stay calm. "If you wanted to work, why didn't you just tell me?" "Because you wouldn't understand." "And that man at the mall? Is he from your job too?" Irma paused for a moment and then replied, "He's just an acquaintance. We ran into each other by chance." "Too many coincidences, Irma." She crossed her arms. "Were you following me? I just want to know the truth." "Thomas, you're paranoid. This isn't normal anymore. Stop following me. I don't like it." He fell silent, realizing it was pointless to continue the conversation. The next day, he decided to act more cautiously. His suspicions had only grown stronger, and now he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what. Thomas was sitting on the porch, watching his neighbor Jim return from an evening walk with his dog. He had been contemplating this step for a long time and finally decided to ask for help. "Hey, Jim," Thomas called out as the neighbor approached. "Oh, hi, Thomas. How's it going?" "Well, there's something strange. Do you have a minute?" Jim tilted his head, showing interest, and sat down on the bench next to Thomas. "Did something happen?" "I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just overthinking. But lately, my Irma has been acting differently." Thomas paused for a moment, trying to find the right words. "She's been distant, leaving the house often, and not telling me what she's up to." "Do you think she's having an affair?" Jim asked bluntly. Thomas nervously rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know yet, but it's starting to bother me." Jim nodded. "Well, if I notice anything, I'll let you know." "Thanks, Jim. Could you also text me if you see anything unusual when I'm not around?" "Of course, buddy. I'm always here." Thomas thanked his neighbor and went back inside. From that moment on, every day felt longer and more tense. The following days brought no changes. Irma continued acting strangely. She communicated with Thomas less and less, rarely discussed her activities, and was always glued to her phone. She often sat in another room, typing something, and whenever Thomas walked in, she quickly turned off the screen. One evening, Thomas tried to talk to her. "Irma, are you hiding something?" She sharply looked up. "What do you mean?" "You've changed. We barely talk anymore. You're constantly on your phone, but you don't tell me what you're up to." "Thomas, you're overreacting. I've just got a lot on my plate right now." "What kind of things?" Thomas tried to stay calm. Irma sighed. "I told you. I started a small side job. It's basically work, but it doesn't require much time. I just wanted to help us financially. I remember you mentioning a side job, but why won't you tell me exactly what it is you're doing? Because it's trivial. I didn't want to bother you. Her response sounded plausible, but Thomas couldn't ignore her frequent outings. He decided to be patient and not jump to conclusions. A few days later, Thomas received a message from Jim. Your Irma left the house again. This time, she met with some guy near the cafe not far from our place. They looked a little too friendly. Thomas read the message several times. He thanked his neighbor and decided to check things out for himself. The next day, skipping work, he drove to the shopping mall Irma often visited. In the parking lot, he spotted her car. Thomas went inside and saw Irma walking between stores with two of her friends. His anxiety started to subside, but a few minutes later, he noticed a man approach them. Irma smiled and seemed to blush slightly. The stranger spoke to her warmly, almost with a hint of affection that Thomas found inappropriate. But what surprised him most was the man's gaze. He looked at Irma as if she were the center of his world. Thomas tried to remain unnoticed. He observed the conversation, which eventually ended with the man saying something before walking away. Irma and her friends continued shopping as if nothing unusual had happened. But then, they hugged this stranger, and her friends acted as though they knew him well. That evening at home, Thomas couldn't hide his unease. Were you at the mall today? Yes, with the girls. Why? Did you meet anyone? No, just the salespeople and staff. He realized there was no point in asking her anything further. He needed to keep observing how she behaved. The next day, Thomas returned home after a long day at the factory. He felt tired, but what worried him more was the strange sense of unease. Irma greeted him at the door with a smile, but her eyes quickly averted his. How was your day? He asked, trying to sound pleasant. Good, Irma replied, avoiding details. I got a lot of useful things done. Thomas was curious about what exactly she had done, but he decided not to press her immediately. During dinner, which he had prepared himself this time, the conversation turned to money. Irma, I've noticed you've been getting a lot of new things lately. Is that part of your job? He asked cautiously. Well, yes. My job isn't just sitting at home. I test product quality, visit restaurants, she said proudly. Thomas frowned. And that pays well? Yes, I earn a good salary. He was struck by the fact that this money never made its way into their shared budget. But I don't see that money. Is it going towards the family? Irma sighed. Thomas, life is short. I want to enjoy it. It's my money, and I spend it as I see fit. He felt anger boiling inside his chest. And who's this person who gave you such a job? Just an acquaintance. Someone who believes in me and my abilities. These words left Thomas without a response. He realized that the answers he truly cared about were still left unsaid. The next morning, Thomas decided to speak with his neighbor, Jim. She says it's a job, Thomas shared. A job? Jim repeated. Something doesn't add up. Jim agreed to keep an eye on the house in case Irma disappeared for another entire day. It was hard for Thomas to believe his suspicions might be true, but Irma's behavior gave him no peace. A few days later, Thomas noticed that Irma dressed up in a new outfit again and left the house with a bag that clearly wasn't meant for casual shopping. That evening, Jim sent him a message. She left in a cab, came back 3 hours later with a gift bag. This pushed Thomas to take more decisive action. He decided to skip work again and follow her personally. He watched as Irma left the house and drove to the shopping mall. Thomas stayed in the shadows. She really did walk through the stores, but after some time, the same stranger Thomas had seen before joined her. How's your job going? The man asked, and Thomas caught fragments of the conversation. Irma laughed. As usual. You know I enjoy it. Thomas couldn't hear much more, but he noticed the man handing her another gift bag. Irma accepted it happily. That evening at home, Thomas couldn't hold back. Who's that man you're meeting at the mall? He asked directly. Irma tried to brush it off. It's just business. He's my work partner. But Thomas could no longer trust her words. And what about the gifts he's giving you? Irma shrugged. They're just bonuses for good work. Thomas realized she was hiding something, and it didn't seem likely anyone would give such extravagant gifts or pay that much for the kind of job she described. Thomas sat at home, holding Irma's phone in his hands. He wasn't looking for anything specific, but he felt something was off. He had already been suspicious, but after accidentally seeing some photos on her phone, things became even more confusing. In one of the photos, Irma was with the same man she often spent time with, smiling, at an upscale restaurant, in the arms of this stranger. Thomas had no concrete evidence, but there was something about their behavior that raised his doubts. He knew she always boasted about how well she was earning and how much she was spending, but she never talked about the exact amounts or the sources of her income. From that moment, Thomas decided not to jump to conclusions. He tried to keep the situation under control, carefully observing Irma's behavior. He didn't tell her about his suspicions or make any rash moves, but increasingly, he felt that Irma and that man had more than just a business relationship. One evening, Thomas followed her. When he arrived at the restaurant, he saw them outside. Irma was wearing a new, expensive coat, and the man was dressed in a suit. They were laughing as they stood close, exchanging jokes. Thomas felt his heart tighten. He followed them all the way to the restaurant, where they entered through the main door. Thomas didn't have the strength to go inside, but he decided to watch from across the street. After a few minutes, he entered the restaurant through the back entrance and sat in a far corner. From there, he had a clear view of the table where Irma and her partner were sitting. He saw them talking, laughing, and ordering an array of dishes. Thomas could feel his nervousness increasing with every gesture they made. They behaved like people who were very close, more than just business partners. He couldn't afford to even order a cup of coffee, as the prices at the restaurant were astronomical. After some time, a waiter approached Thomas. "Would you like to order something?" the waiter asked coldly. Thomas felt his train of thought interrupted by the simple question. "I'm just looking." "Those two," he pointed to Irma and her companion, "do they come here often?" The waiter looked at him with disapproval. "That's none of your business. Are you going to order something or not?" Thomas felt embarrassed. He couldn't afford even a simple dish because of the high prices, and his desire to find out more was so strong that he simply left the restaurant. Leaving, he got into his car and drove home, feeling his heart constrict with unexplainable emotions. On the drive home, he thought about everything that had happened. He didn't have clear evidence that Irma was cheating, but what he saw at the restaurant left no doubt that there was something more than just business between her and that man. They held hands and looked into each other's eyes like lovers. He didn't know what to do with this information. Maybe he just didn't want to see the truth. On the other hand, he realized Irma might be hiding something. He wasn't sure if he should intervene further in her life. At home, he tried to remain calm. Irma hadn't returned yet, and he began wondering whether he should confront her directly and ask about everything. But he knew he needed more evidence for that. When Irma returned home, she looked pleased. She immediately went to the bathroom, and Thomas couldn't ask her about the restaurant or the stranger right away. He recalled that evening and decided to wait for a moment when they were together, and it would be easier to bring up the topic. "Did you have a meeting with someone important?" he asked when they sat down to dinner together. Irma looked at him and smiled. "Yes, it was a work dinner. You know I work with different people. It's part of my job." Thomas felt his heart tighten. His suspicions were confirmed, but he still said nothing. "I've noticed you always seem to enjoy yourself at those restaurant meetings," he added, trying not to be too direct. Irma looked at him with surprise. "Are you trying to say I don't have the right to enjoy myself? You know I'm working, and I like it." Thomas could feel the tension building. He couldn't say what he really wanted to, but he felt like a spectator in his own life. He simply nodded, and they continued their dinner in silence. Thomas woke up slowly the next morning, feeling the usual unpleasant weight of suspicion. All these days, he had tried to ignore what was happening in his relationship with Irma. After the last incident, when he saw photos of her and her partner at the restaurant, his thoughts kept returning to it. He had no concrete evidence, but his heart told him something wasn't right. Yesterday, while going through Irma's phone, he accidentally found a few messages that changed everything. One of them caught his attention. Irma wrote to her partner, "Meeting next week at your favorite place? I can't wait." It was simple, but it carried a lot of meaning for Thomas. It seemed like they were discussing something unrelated to work. All the hints and jokes in the messages she sent him truly looked like more than just a professional relationship. Thomas knew Irma often bragged about her meetings with different people, but what he saw was something else. She repeatedly mentioned how much she enjoyed spending time with this man and how he always managed to give her something special. Thomas felt his internal anxiety intensify. He couldn't be sure, but these messages changed the picture in his head. Even so, he decided not to jump to conclusions again. He needed to keep watching. That day, he decided not to bring it up when Irma returned home. He sat at the table, trying to stay calm. "How are you?" Irma asked as she entered the room, taking off her coat. "I'm fine. Just thinking about things," Thomas replied, trying to remain calm. "What do you mean?" Irma approached him and sat on the couch. "Oh, nothing important. Just work." Thomas couldn't find the right words. Not wanting to seem suspicious, he added, "But you've been having a lot of meetings, haven't you? Still the same job?" Irma smiled. "Yes, work. But it's not just about work, you know. There are many pleasant moments when it even becomes more exciting." Thomas couldn't hold back his question. "And how often do you meet with him?" He couldn't help but emphasize the word him. Irma looked at him, her face turning serious for a moment. "I don't know who you mean. I work with many people, and you know that," she said, trying to keep her composure. Thomas felt a slight unease, but refrained from asking further. He realized he needed more evidence to confirm his suspicions. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't idle. That same evening, he once again checked Irma's phone. He discovered a few new messages that reinforced his doubts. Irma and her partner were arranging a meeting for the upcoming weekend, even discussing details that seemed very personal, even romantic. Thomas sat on the couch, reflecting on recent events. He couldn't figure out whether Irma was deceiving him or if her affairs had become so complicated that she needed help. He had long noticed that her relationship with her partner seemed more personal than professional. Yet every time he tried to ask about it, Irma either deflected or acted as if everything was fine. That day, she returned home from work later than usual. She looked a bit upset but, as always, tried to remain calm. "Hi, how are you?" Thomas asked, paying attention to her. "Hi, I'm fine. Just a lot of work," Irma smiled, but her eyes seemed different. Thomas immediately noticed something was off. "What's wrong? You look tired," he couldn't help but ask. Irma sat on the couch next to him, silent for a moment. "I have some news," she finally said, deciding to talk. "I got an offer from my partner. He's offered me a higher position." Thomas raised his eyebrows. "What kind of position? And what's the offer?" he asked, trying to stay calm, though his emotions were mixed. Irma looked slightly confused but decided to explain. "It's a more responsible role. I'll be recruiting people for a new program. We'll be visiting restaurants, tasting food, and testing new places for our partners. It'll be not only interesting but also very well paid." Thomas couldn't immediately grasp what she was talking about. "Wait, are you serious? Visiting restaurants and tasting food for money? This sounds like some sort of scam." His voice grew slightly harsher. "It sounds too good to be true." Irma tried to reassure him. "It's not a scam, Thomas. You don't understand. This is an opportunity for me to build a career. I've been working with this man for a while, and he wants me to take on more responsibilities. It'll allow me to get out of where I am now and have more opportunities." Thomas thought for a moment. It was hard for him to believe it. He couldn't understand why Irma would choose to do something like this. He knew her, and her desire for change made sense, but this offer seemed too strange. "I don't get it, Irma. It feels like this is something completely different. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against change, but this doesn't seem honest to me." Irma looked a bit disappointed by his response. She sighed. "Maybe you're right, but this is an important step for me. If you want, I could even suggest that you work with me. You could earn a good salary too, and we could enjoy this new life together." Thomas thought for a moment. The idea of working in restaurants and earning a big salary sounded too tempting, but he couldn't believe it was that simple. He felt like something was wrong. "You know, I love my job. I enjoy what I do, even if I don't make much money. But what's more important to me is growing in my field, and I don't want to follow you into this restaurant business," he said with determination, looking at her. "I'm not interested in that." I don't want that kind of life. Irma paused for a moment, trying to understand what she might have done wrong. Her proposal had been rejected, and it felt like a major blow. I understand, she said, sounding a bit upset. You don't want to. That's your right. But Thomas couldn't help noticing how she began to grow distant from him. Each day, the gap between them seemed to widen. Irma became more withdrawn, and her behavior changed. She spent more time with her partners, who were supposedly just business acquaintances, but Thomas noticed her interests seemed to shift in another direction. They no longer spent time together. Irma was always busy with her own affairs, while Thomas remained stuck in his routine. The more he observed, the more he realized that her behavior seemed strange. All those outings with her partner, all those fancy lunches she discussed in her messages, no longer seemed innocent. Thomas started noticing that they spent more and more time together, but it was time he couldn't share with her. Irma grew increasingly indifferent to his presence, and Thomas felt more alienated from her. One evening, after another late meeting with her partner, Irma came home to find Thomas sitting in the dark, waiting for her. He knew it was time to get the truth, but his heart was filled with doubt. "You're still up?" Irma asked as she walked into the room. Thomas didn't reply immediately. He calmly looked up. "Irma, I know what's going on," he said emotionlessly. "I've seen everything you're doing. I think you're cheating on me, though I'm not entirely sure about anything. But I'm tired of your indifference toward me lately." Irma froze for a moment. Her gaze turned cold. "How could you think that about me? Do you not trust me at all?" she said, staring at him. "I'm sorry, maybe I'm wrong, but that's how it feels," Thomas said. Irma immediately went to another room, refusing to discuss it further with him. Thomas felt devastated, but the uncertainty was even more tormenting. He had no concrete proof of infidelity, but he felt something was off. Thoughts of Irma and her behavior haunted him. He couldn't just forget it all. If she was indeed cheating on him, he had to find out the truth. The decision came unexpectedly. Thomas decided to use social media to find this man. He wasn't sure if he'd uncover anything useful, but it was his only way to learn more. After several unsuccessful attempts over a few days, he managed to find Christian. He sent him a brief message and requested a meeting. The men agreed to meet at a cafe a few blocks from Thomas's house. When Thomas arrived, Christian was already waiting. He looked serious, slightly puzzled, but ready to talk. "Good afternoon, I'm Thomas," he said, sitting across from Christian. "Hello. I'm Christian," he replied, waiting for Thomas to explain what brought him there. Thomas took a deep breath and, unsure where to start, simply said, "My wife. I think she's cheating on me, and I suspect you have something to do with it." Christian didn't reply immediately. He thought for a moment and looked at Thomas with a slightly surprised expression. "Your wife? Irma?" he asked. Thomas nodded. "Yes, I'm her husband, and I feel like whatever is going on between you and her goes beyond just professional collaboration." Christian sat silently, glancing at Thomas, then gave a faint smile. "Thomas, I don't know how to tell you this, but Irma told me she wasn't married. She said the ring I saw was from her husband, who passed away several years ago." Thomas was shocked. She told you that?" "Yes," Christian replied. "She said it was a keepsake from him and that it was just her memories. I believed her because, well, who would think she was lying?" Thomas leaned back, trying to process what he was hearing. "So, you didn't know she was married? You didn't know I existed?" Christian shrugged. "No, I thought she was just dealing with loss and didn't want to start a new relationship, which explained her behavior. But over time, we became closer. I've been with her for a month now, and she kept changing her promises. Everything I did for her, all the money I gave her. I thought it was helping her, but it turns out, it's hard for me to say this, but she has been cheating on you with me, many times. I'm so sorry this happened. I never imagined she was deceiving both of us." Thomas felt like he could barely stay seated. "You didn't know? She didn't tell you I'm her husband, and all this was happening behind my back?" "No, I didn't know," Christian replied. "I'm sorry. I didn't want this. She told me she had no other choice. She said she wanted to be with me but couldn't let go of her memories of her husband." Thomas felt his heart tighten. "She told me the same thing, that she didn't want to change anything. But now I see that she's been manipulating both of us. Thomas, I truly apologize, Christian said, noticing the pain in Thomas's voice. I didn't know she did this. I thought we could be together. She even wanted me to help her with new plans. I'm sorry, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. Thomas paused. It was hard for him to believe that this man was truly remorseful. No need for apologies. She deceived both of us, he said. Christian looked at Thomas with regret. I understand, but I'm offering you money if that would help, or even a job in my company. Do you want to improve your situation somehow? Money? Thomas asked. I don't want your money. I want justice. Christian lowered his gaze. I understand. If you want, we can do something about this together. I'm willing to help you deal with Irma. Thomas thought about it. Irma was a deceiver, and something needed to be done about it. Fine, let's try. But we're going to do this in a way that makes her realize manipulation won't work. Christian nodded again. I'm with you. How do you want to do it? Thomas gathered his thoughts. We're going to act carefully, but in a way that shows her who's really in control. They began to plan. Though it was painful, Thomas no longer wanted to remain a passive observer. Irma deserved what was coming to her. Thomas and Christian devised a plan for revenge. They wanted Irma to feel what they had felt. For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt calm. After spending several days in Christian's luxurious house, he began to feel that, although the situation was painful, it brought him some peace of mind. Being away from home gave him time to think, to gather his thoughts, and, most importantly, to set aside his emotions. He no longer dwelled on his own heartbreak, leaving his feelings behind because one thing mattered most: revenge. Christian arranged for one of his acquaintances to create a deepfake video showing Thomas being in a car accident and dying. Meanwhile, Thomas disappeared for several days and turned off his phone. During this time, he lived in Christian's lavish home, and they even became friends. Although Christian was a businessman, he turned out to be a pleasant and down-to-earth person, much like Thomas. Christian stayed supportive, and though he found it unpleasant as well, he felt their plan was finally nearing its conclusion. They had gathered all the evidence, but the final piece was missing: the moment when Irma would realize the full truth and pay for her lies. Ready? Christian asked, looking at Thomas. Thomas nodded. He was ready. Ready for this challenge. We'll do it as planned, Christian added, picking up his phone to call Irma. I'll tell her I invited you over for an evening talk. Hopefully, she's already on edge. Thomas sat on the couch, listening carefully as Christian made the call. After a few minutes, Christian spoke a few phrases and hung up. She's coming. It's all set. Thomas exhaled. There was no room left in his heart for emotions, only cold determination. They were on the verge of completing this plan, and he knew Irma had to understand the pain and disappointment she had brought into their lives. A few hours later, as the sun began to set, Irma arrived at the door. She looked worried, clearly nervous. Christian could sense that her anxiety stemmed from her husband's disappearance for several days. She was likely distressed. However, he understood her distress was just part of the game she had been playing with both of them. Hi, Irma said as she entered the room. Christian smiled faintly. Hi, you look concerned. I wanted to show you something. Irma sat down on the couch, and Christian turned on the television. A video began to play on the large screen. At first, Irma didn't understand what she was seeing. It was footage of a car accident, a vehicle skidding off the road, with details that appeared disturbingly realistic. Then information appeared on the screen: Thomas, fatal car accident. She couldn't believe her eyes. It was her husband. It all looked shockingly real. Irma immediately began crying, her face consumed by shock. She clutched her head, and tears streamed down her cheeks. No, this can't be. That's my husband. He's dead, she whispered softly. Christian sat next to her but didn't respond immediately. He simply observed her reaction. He remained calm, knowing this was part of the plan, but even he couldn't be entirely indifferent to the situation. This was their revenge, but perhaps Irma didn't deserve such cruelty. I wanted you to see this, Christian said, without looking at her. Thomas is really gone, Irma. Irma sat silently, still in shock, until the video stopped playing and the room lights turned on as someone opened the door from another room. Irma looked up, and her expression changed instantly when she saw who was standing in the doorway. "Thomas!" she uttered in shock, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Thomas stood in the doorway, calmly looking at Irma. He was alive, and everything that had happened was just a part of their plan. What does this mean?" Irma asked, unable to believe her eyes. "You're alive? How is this possible?" Thomas approached her and sat in the chair across from her. "I'm alive, Irma, and now we're going to talk about what you've really done." Irma remained silent, stunned. She couldn't grasp how this had happened. All her manipulations, all her lies, had proved powerless. "You lied to both of us, Irma," Thomas continued calmly. "You deceived me. You deceived Christian. You cheated on me, and Christian didn't even know you had a husband or that he was alive. You thought you could get away with it all. But now everything has changed." Irma stood in silence, trying to process everything that had happened. She tried to think of a way out of this situation, but she realized there was nowhere left to run. Christian, noticing her silence, added, "You got everything you wanted, Irma. Now we've taken back what was ours." I don't know what to say," Irma stammered, her voice trembling. "There's nothing left to say," Thomas replied, standing up. "You've done it all, and now you'll have to live with the consequences." Irma sat on the couch, still unable to believe what had happened. Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away repeatedly with her hands. For a few moments, she remained silent, trying to gather her thoughts. It was hard for her to accept that everything she had tried so hard to hide had now come to light. Thomas stood before her, calmly looking at her, but his eyes showed determination. "You knew I'd find out," Thomas said quietly. "You lied to me, Irma." Irma took a few deep breaths and looked up. Her voice was muffled. "Yes, I knew, but I didn't think it would all happen so soon." Thomas sat nearby, waiting for her to continue. "You knew everything about me and Christian, about our meetings, about how I lied, saying you were dead. But there's one more thing I haven't told anyone, not even you." Her voice began to tremble. "You don't know that Christian and I were planning to be together. We intended to start a new life after I." Thomas looked at her intently, trying to understand what she meant. "What do you mean?" he asked. Irma took a deep breath and placed her hands on her knees. "Christian isn't just a businessman. He's also my partner in what I do. I helped him set up all these operations so he could avoid tax audits. It didn't just happen by chance. We have a business together, and we intended to make a lot of money." Thomas couldn't believe what he was hearing. He looked at Irma with newfound hatred. "You deceived me, not just because of Christian, but because of your involvement in his schemes?" he asked, trying to control his emotions. Irma nodded. "I know it looks terrible, but I thought it would be better for us. For you too, Thomas. I thought it would go unnoticed." Thomas tilted his head in disappointment, not knowing what to say next. He had no feelings left for Irma, only deep disappointment. "And now you want me to understand?" he asked coldly. Irma began to cry again, but this time her tears seemed genuine. "I thought it would be better for both of us." Thomas stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights stretching before him. The silence was heavy, and every word Irma had said felt like another blow to his heart. "What now?" Irma asked as he turned back to her. Her voice carried doubt, but her heart felt the heavy burden of guilt. "Now we do what needs to be done. Otherwise, this will never end," Thomas replied, slowly approaching her. He no longer doubted that his decision was the right one. Though he didn't know how it would all end, he knew there would be no more mistakes. Thomas ended his relationship with Irma and decided to start a new life. His newfound friend Christian helped him secure a new job and position. Thomas blocked Irma and never spoke to her again. What do you think about Irma's actions, and how would you have reacted in Thomas's place? Share your thoughts in the comments.